You guys, I want to tell you a story today. I want to tell you the story about something that happened to the Jewish people a long, 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 long time ago. Way back, even before Jesus was here on earth, like 1,000 years before that, even this happened to the Jewish people. They were taken prisoner by the Egyptians, and they were brought back to Egypt from where they were, and they were made to be slaves in Egypt. And they were so sad about this, and they had been slaves for a long, long time. Like, if you were living during that time, your parents would have been slaves, your grandma and grandpa would have been a slave, and you would have been a slave. And the whole time they were crying out to God, and they were asking God to deliver them from this terrible slavery where they were in Egypt. Finally, God answered their prayer, and he sent a man named Moses. And he told Moses, you go and tell the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, to let those people go back to their homeland and to free them from slavery. And Moses went to Pharaoh, and he tried, and he asked Pharaoh to let them go. But Pharaoh's heart was very hard, and he said, nope, I'm not letting the Jewish people go. So God started to send some plagues down on the land of Egypt. And they were plagues like lots of flies that would be everywhere, and plagues like locusts that would come and they would eat all the Egyptians' food. And the Egyptian people and the Jews too, they were suffering under all these things that were trying to convince Pharaoh to let them go. But Pharaoh just would not budge. So finally, God sent the 10th plague, and it was called the death of the firstborn sons. So on a special particular day, God was going to send an angel down and cover the land of Egypt, and everyone's firstborn son, their oldest son in your family, was going to die. And the Jewish people heard about this through Moses, and they thought, what about our sons? What's going to happen to our firstborn sons? And God told Moses, it's okay, I have a plan for you to save your sons. And he told Moses to tell the people that on this particular day, what they were to do is as the sun went down, they were to take a perfect lamb, a perfect 1-year-old boy lamb, and they were to take it into their house. And the father of every house, back in those days, they didn't have priests like we do now. So the father acted as the priest. And what he was supposed to do is sacrifice the lamb. He should slit the lamb's throat and catch the lamb's blood in a bowl. And then he would take a branch of hyssop and put the blood on the hyssop and paint it over the doorway of their homes. And then they would all sit down together and they would eat the lamb that they had sacrificed. And in doing so, when the angel of death came over the land of Egypt, they would see the blood over the door and know that those people had sacrificed a lamb and had eaten that lamb, and they wouldn't, the angel of death would pass over that person's house. And that's what came to be. On that particular day, all the Jewish people did this. They got their lamb, sacrificed it, they cooked it, they ate it, they put the blood over the door, and then they waited because they knew that God was coming to deliver them, to save them through this terrible plague. They were waiting, and the next morning the sun came up, and all the Egyptian people discovered that their firstborn sons had died. And do you know who else found out their son had died? It was Pharaoh. It's the king. He discovered that his son too had died, and he was so upset and beside himself that he just said, go ahead, Jewish people, you're free from your slavery, you can go. And they all got up, and they went and they followed Moses out into the desert. And this whole event that saved the Jewish people from their slavery in Egypt, they called the Passover because of that angel passing over their houses. And the Jewish people remembered this Passover. Every year when that date came up again, they would remember how God had saved them from slavery. And they would celebrate that by eating this special meal that helped them remember what had happened. They ate roasted lamb, and they had this flat bread that they had made that day because they didn't have time for it to rise because they were waiting, right, for God to save them. And they would eat these special things that would remind them of the first Passover. And they had a tradition as time went on that one of the little kids in the house would ask their father, what what makes this day special, this Passover day? And the father would say, well, we're celebrating when God saved me from slavery in Egypt. And even if it had been hundreds and hundreds of years after the first Passover, the father would always say, God had saved me from slavery. So as they were celebrating Passover every year, they were remembering God saving all the Jews and remembering that actually God was still kind of saving them. And through that meal, they would remember that. So fast forward to when Jesus was here on earth. When Jesus was a little boy, he celebrated the Passover every year with his mom and dad. And they would go into Jerusalem, and at that time they had the big temple, right, in Jerusalem. So they would go into Jerusalem and they would get their lamb and they would bring it into the temple, and the priests would sacrifice the lamb and put the blood on the altar. They would take their lamb home and they would eat this special meal every year. So Jesus did this every year of his life with his mom and dad. And when he got older, he did this with his disciples. And that's what was happening the night that Jesus had the Last Supper. And when he got his friends together, he told them to go ahead and go and prepare the Passover meal for him in Jerusalem. And so they probably went and got the lamb and took it to the temple and sacrificed the lamb, and they brought it back to that upper room where Jesus celebrated his Passover meal. And he got his 12 disciples together, and Jesus was kind of acting like the dad during that meal, right? So he was the one that they would have been talking to Jesus about, why do we do this? And Jesus would have been talking about how God had saved them. But Jesus had a plan. Jesus was going to take this regular Passover meal that was always celebrated by the Jews, and he was going to turn it into something new, a new way to save us from not just slavery, but from slavery to sin and death itself. Jesus was going to take this gift that God had given the Jews, and he was going to open it not just for Jewish people, but for everyone. He was going to open this saving gift up for everyone, and he did it on that Passover night. Jesus took the bread and he broke it and gave it his disciples and said, take this, all of you, and eat of it. This is not just the bread anymore, but my body, right? Because if we're going to have a Passover, we need a lamb. That's one of the most essential parts of the Passover, is that you need to have a sacrificial lamb that you then eat, because that's what makes that saving thing that, remember, saved the original Jews back in Egypt, that blood of the lamb and the eating of the lamb. So Jesus knew there needed to be a lamb, and what he chose was that he was going to be that lamb. But how could we all eat the lamb then, right? So Jesus instituted this at Mass, where he could become the bread so that he could be consumed by us, so that we could, all these years after Jesus was here on earth, we could still participate in his Passover by eating the bread that becomes Jesus for us at the Mass. So when he was at that last Passover meal, and he said this to his 12 friends, he was saying, go ahead, you now can make this sacrifice. And that's when the first 12 priests were made. And they then were able to do what Jesus did, to take that bread and that wine and change it into Jesus himself, so that even after Jesus is no longer with us, we can still participate in that Passover meal with Jesus. So the Mass that we hear every Sunday is actually kind of a representation of that Passover meal that the Jewish people celebrated when they were saved by God from slavery in Egypt. And now we can celebrate that every Sunday at Mass, every day at Mass. We can celebrate our saving Passover, that God saved us from sin and death and led us not into a physical Holy Land, but opens the doors of heaven for us so that we can exist forever with him in heaven.